أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Inshallah, we're continuing on with the Prophet's legendary legacy in the military career perspective, that is, and we're talking and discussing the various apostate wars and military expeditions sent by the Khalifa of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, whom is none other than Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. We are now at the Battle of Buzayha and the destruction of Banu Asad. Page number 435. Khalid radiallahu anhu led his men onwards until he reached Ajah in Salma territory, which is where he made camp and prepared his army for battle. When he radiallahu anhu and his men set out again, they came face to face with Tulayha's army at a place called Buzayha. And yet the two opposing armies were not the only ones that were present at the scene of the impending battle. Many Bedouin tribes were present as well. They, however, came not as soldiers, but as spectators. They felt that it was too risky to side with either army, and so they decided to wait out the conflict and take sides with the victors. Tulayha came with his followers from his tribe, and he was also accompanied by various other tribes and groups of individuals who decided to follow him. One such group consisted of 700 soldiers from Banu Fuzara tribe. They had arrived at the scene under the leadership of Uyayna ibn Hisn. When the two armies lined up for battle, Tulayha sat down at the rear of his army and wrapped himself up in one of his robes. He claimed that he wanted his soldiers to fight while he waited for revelation to descend upon him. The battle then began in earnest, and Uyayna ibn Hisn fought bravely until he became tired and decided to take rest. He went back to Tulayha, who was still wrapped up in his robe, and asked him, "Has the angel Jibril come to you?" Tulayha said, "No." Uyayna then returned to the battlefield, fought for a while, and then returned again and asked Tulayha the same question. Once again, Tulayha responded in the negative. On the third time around, Uyayna repeated the same question. "Has Jibril come to you?" Tulayha said, "Yes." And Uyayna asked, "Then what did he say to you?" Tulayha gave a nonsensical response, which was, in Uyayna's estimation, clear proof that Tulayha was nothing more than a charlatan, and that his claims of prophethood were absolutely untrue. Uyayna's change of heart did not bode well for Tulayha, for Uyayna called out to his 700 soldiers, ordering them to retreat and to flee from the scene of the battle. Thus Tulayha's forces were greatly depleted, but that was not the end of his woes, for a chain reaction followed, one in which group after group and soldier after soldier fled from the battlefield. Chaos ensued for Tulayha's soldiers. They were fleeing in all directions, with each man being concerned only for his own safety. It was at that point that Tulayha mounted a horse that he had prepared for such an eventuality, and he helped his wife An-Nuwayar mount a riding camel that belonged to him. Together the two of them fled towards Asham, Syria, and surrounding regions. Meanwhile, the Muslim army gave chase to Tulayha's followers, attempting to capture and kill anyone they could find. Upon being informed about the results of the battle and about how Tulayha's army was permanently disabled, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu wrote a congratulatory letter to Khalid ibn Al-Walid, The next of that letter, or the text of that letter, ran as follows, in quotes: May Allah increase you in the goodness that He has blessed you with, and fear Allah regarding all of your affairs, for indeed Allah is with those who fear Him and those who do righteous deeds. Be stern now and do not become soft. So if you come across any polytheists from the apostates who had killed even a single Muslim, exact revenge upon him. And so, in keeping with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq's instructions, Khalid ibn al-Walid stayed in the area of Buzakha for an entire month. He radiallahu anhu and his men pursued enemy fighters, seeking revenge not only on behalf of those Muslims who had died in the recent battle, but also on behalf of those Muslims who had lived among the apostates and had been persecuted, tortured, or killed for their beliefs. In short, Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu was to make an example of the apostates, so that no one in the region would ever again think of apostatizing of one of persecuting Muslims who lived in their midst, or for that matter of waging war against Muslim armies. Sufficient warning had been given to the apostates, but because they had refused to return to Al-Islam, because they were adamant in their desire to fight against and kill Muslims, and because they were guilty of heinous war crimes, those of them that Khalid ibn al-Walid captured were either burned to death, crushed with huge stones, or thrown off of a cliff of tall mountains. News of their demise spread throughout the region, and thus terror was instilled into the hearts of other apostate and renegade tribes. The delegation of men from the Asad and Ghatfan tribes visited Abu Bakr. The main followers of Tulayha were members of the Asad and Ghatfan tribes. A group of them visited Abu Bakr as-Siddiq in order to ask him for a truce. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu responded by giving them one of two bitter choices. Either they could continue the conflict with an all-out war against the Muslims, or they could surrender and agree to humiliating terms. They responded, As for an open war against you, we know what it means, for we have already tasted the consequences of doing battle against you. So what are the humiliating terms you speak of? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq says, all weapons and horses will be taken from you, and you will become a people who follow the tails of camels. Perhaps this means you will become nomads in the desert, until Allah makes the Khalifa of His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the believers see some positive change in you, a change that will result in your being pardoned. Furthermore, you will return all of the booty you took from us, while we will not give you back. We will not give back to you anything we won from you. You will bear witness that our fallen fighters are in paradise, and that your fallen fighters are in the hellfire. And you will pay blood money for our fallen fighters, while we will not pay blood money for your fallen fighters. Umar radiallahu then said to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, As for your saying, you will pay blood money for our fallen fighters. No blood money should be paid for them, since they died fighting for the sake of Allah. But shortly thereafter, Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu changed his mind and said to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, Blessed and good was your opinion regarding the issue of receiving blood money. Zilm, this is a different bulletin. Many of the former followers of Tulayha, either looking for a new cause or a new leader, rallied around a woman named Zilm. Okay, this is the name of this particular section, whose actual full name was Salma bint Malik ibn Hudafa. Zilm lived in a place called Dafar which was situated near Al-Hu'ab, along the road that led from Basra to Al-Madinah. Salma was a prominent and well-known female chieftain. She had initially gained respect because of her mother Firqa, who, because of her many children, her high standing among her tribe, and her noble lineage, was considered by Arabs a paragon of nobleness. Salma encouraged her newfound followers to wage war against Khalid ibn al-Walid. They enthusiastically obeyed her, and they were joined by a number of individuals from the Sulaim, Tay, Hawazin, and Asad tribes. Thus the army became quite large and formidable, and Salma was now deemed a powerful leader in the region. But her fame and power was short-lived, for no sooner did Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu hear about the formation of her army than he set out with his army to engage them in battle. When the battle later began in earnest, the fighting was fierce. In the end, however, the Muslims came out victorious, and Khalid ibn al-Walid killed both Salma and the riding camel upon which she was mounted. Once the battle was concluded, Khalid ibn al-Walid sent the news of the victory to Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, who was the Khalifa of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, leader of the Muslim government, and actually administering all military operations. And we talked about that several videos ago. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq's trust in Allah in his brilliant military strategy. Lessons in morals, this is. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said to Adi ibn Hatim radiallahu anhu, go to your people and prevent them from joining up with Tulayha, for if they do join the ranks of his followers, it will be the cause of their destruction. End quote. That Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said radiallahu anhu, it will be the cause of their destruction, points to his strong faith in that even before any battle took place, he knew that the results would be Allah Jalla Jalaluhu would help his obedient slaves, and the Muslim army would easily defeat Tulayha and his followers from the Tai tribe. Also, by ordering Khalid ibn al-Walid to begin his expedition by going to the Tai tribe, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu showed just how brilliant a military strategist he was. Tai, it should be remembered, was further away from Medina than was the place wherein Tulayha and his followers were gathered. On the surface, therefore, it would have been better to attack Tulayha and his followers first. But in reality, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu made a wise decision, taking a step that would prevent the people of Taif from joining up with Tulayha, or at the very least would force those of Taif members who had already joined up with Tulayha to abandon Tulayha, to return to their native land, and to defend their fellow tribesmen against Khalid ibn al-Walid's army. Regardless of how the people of Taif would respond to Adi's invitation to return to Islam, Khalid ibn al-Walid and his men, by going to Taif first, would be able to at once decrease the size of and weaken Tulayha's army. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, even though he was in Al-Madinah for far removed from Tulayha's army, was able to influence the outcome of the war in other ways as well. For instance, he radiallahu anhu announced that he was heading out with an army in the direction of Khaybar, with the goal of meeting up with Khalid's army in Taif territory. Of course, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq knew that the news of his announcement would quickly reach the enemy, and that is exactly what he desired, for he wanted to instill fear into the hearts of both enemy soldiers and all people who remained undecided as to whether they would side with Tulayha or the Muslims. But perhaps the greatest impact that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu had on the conflict was choosing the right leader for his army. Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu was known as a man of war, both as a soldier, a commander, and a military strategist. If the Muslims hoped to achieve a quick and decisive victory, they needed the leadership skills and military genius of Khalid ibn al-Walid. This proved to be true, for Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu led his army to a surprisingly easy victory against the formidable and sizable army of Tulayha. When the Battle of Buzayha was over, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq sent a very meaningful letter to Khalid ibn al-Walid, one in which he congratulated Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu and provided him with important advice. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq wrote, "May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase you in the goodness that He has blessed you with, and fear Allah regarding all of your affairs, for indeed Allah is with those who fear Him and those who do good deeds. Be stern now and do not become soft. So if you come across any polytheists from the apostates who had killed even a single Muslim, exact revenge upon him." End quote. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was showing concern for the welfare of one of his Muslim brothers. He began his beautiful letter by supplicating for Khalid ibn al-Walid. He radiallahu anhu reminded Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu about the importance of fearing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, an issue that is especially important for military commanders, since a mistake or an act of tyranny on their part results usually not in hurt feelings but in death and injuries. In short, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was saying to Khalid ibn al-Walid that he should continue to wage war against or according to the Islamic rules of warfare. This meant that he had to take good care of his soldiers, that he was not to kill women and children, that he was not to wrongly mutilate the bodies of fallen enemy soldiers, and so on. The apostate differed from other enemies of Al-Islam in that they did not deserve the least bit of mercy. They were people who had tasted the sweetness of faith, but then, because of worldly concerns, opted to replace guidance with misguidance. What is more, they treacherously sought to take advantage of the vulnerable state of the Muslims. Vulnerable because the Prophet ﷺ had just died, by preparing to wage war against them. They were not enemies in the sense that the Romans were enemies. They were more accurately put traitors who had betrayed their oath to defend and be loyal to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His messenger, and the believers. For these reasons, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq in his letter to Khalid ibn al-Walid ordered him to be unrelenting in his pursuit of apostate soldiers. By being stern with the apostates, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq hoped to achieve two goals. First, to punish the apostates for their treachery, and second, to make an example of them, for there were still many tribes throughout the region that were wavering in their faith, not having as of then decided whether they preferred the truth or falsehood, guidance or misguidance, good or evil, faith or disbelief. So we see from this letter that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, though he is predominantly remembered for being soft and easygoing, was stern when sternness was called for, and merciful when mercy was the appropriate course of action. When delegates from the Asad and Ghatfan tribes visited Al-Madinah, Bakr as-Siddiq again was able to directly steer the course of the war through his policy decisions. He radiallahu anhu set a clear tone for the war, informing the delegates that since they had not repented when the opportunity to do so was presented to them, he was not prepared to make any concessions to them. They could either accept his terms or their surrender, or they could go back and prepare for an open all-out war against the Muslims. To be sure, his first stance of Abu Bakr, the firm stand of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu sent a clear message to all of those apostates in the region. The Muslims would not waver or hesitate or waste time with peace treaties. Instead, they would unrelentingly continue to fight the war until they succeeded in completely eradicating apostasy from the peninsula. Thus, knowing that they were no challenge for their Muslim counterparts, the leader of the Ghatfan and Asad accepted defeat, as well as Abu Bakr's terms of their surrender. They gave up their weapons and their horses, and they were not allowed to take up weapons again until they repented and proved their sincerity to the Muslim nation. Preventing them from bearing arms acted as a guarantee that they will never again return to apostasy. Very important lesson. Adi ibn Hatim radiallahu anhu. We have to talk about Adi ibn Hatim radiallahu anhu. He radiallahu anhu was truly a blessing for his people. He had to walk a tightrope when he had to deal with both his people and Khalid ibn al-Walid, having to convince the former to return to al-Islam and having to prevent the latter from attacking them. Adi was himself a sincere Muslim, but in order to achieve his aims, he had to come down to the level of his people and convince them that from a worldly point of view, it was in their best interest to return to al-Islam. He radiallahu anhu told them that the Muslim army was definitely going to defeat them, kill their men and take their women as prisoners. He radiallahu anhu said this because he sensed that his people were underestimating the strength of the Muslim army. He won over his people and with his arguments, but they did make one stipulation. They would openly announce their re-entry into the fold of al-Islam only after they sent word to those of their fellow tribesmen who had already joined the ranks of Tulayha's followers. They feared that if Tulayha were to learn of their return to al-Islam, he would either kill their fellow tribesmen or use them as hostages. Now, all Adi radiallahu anhu had to do was to convince Khalid ibn al-Walid not to attack his fellow tribesmen. This was a tall order since, or we should say, this was a tough order since Khalid ibn al-Walid was known to be a stern and unrelenting military commander. When it came to warfare, he was known to show more of an iron fist than soft heart. So Adi addressed Khalid at his level, arguing that from a military standpoint, it was in his best interest to wait 3 days. For according to at least one account, Adi promised that after the passing of 3 days, he would bring Khalid 500 fighters from his tribe. Given the strength of Adi's arguments, Khalid agreed to fulfill his request. And true to his word, Adi, after the passing of 3 days, returned with 500 fighters from the Banu al-Ghawth clan. From Adi's tribe was made of 2 clans, the Banu Ghawth clan and the Banu Jadila clan. A short while later, Adi convinced Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu to allow him to speak with the members of Banu Jadila clan. They too were convinced by Adi's arguments, and 1,000 of their fighters joined the ranks of Khalid ibn al-Walid's army. And so, through diplomacy and sincere desire to save his people, Adi radiallahu anhu not only brought his fellow tribesmen back to al-Islam, but also his efforts resulted in 1,500 soldiers being added to the ranks of Khalid ibn al-Walid's army. These people acted nobly as well, for they could have sat out the war and waited to see which side came out victorious. But instead, they decided to risk their lives and to contribute a contingent of 1,500 fighters for the Muslim army. Nonetheless, Adi's people were careful and did not want to pay the consequences of fighting against their allies from the Banu Asad tribe. Rather than fight against their allies, they asked Khalid ibn al-Walid for permission to instead fight against the people of Qais, for they too had a past ties. Khalid accused, or he accepted to their request, saying to them, "By Allah, the people of Qais are not weaker of the two opposing armies. Stand up firmly and fight against whichever of the two tribes you want." Adi radiallahu anhu, on the other hand, was furious with his people, and he expressed his outrage when he said, "Were the closest members of my family and of my tribe to abandon this religion, I would have fought against them. So why then should I refuse to fight Banu Asad even if they have been our allies? No, by Allah, I will not do that." Khalid ibn al-Walid took a more moderate approach, for he was interested more in achieving results than in anything else. Moreover, he felt to what the people of Qais said actually made sense. Since both of the Qais and the Banu Asad tribes were enemies of the Muslims, since the people of Qais had been allied to the Banu Asad tribe, and since the people of Qais were weak in their faith and only recently having returned to Al-Islam, it was likely that they would fight with more enthusiasm and with less chances of being tempted to betray Khalid ibn al-Walid if they were sent to fight against the people of Qais. Thus Khalid ibn al-Walid said to Adi, "Verily waging war against both groups, against the people of Qais and the people of Banu Asad, is jihad. So do not show opposition to the opinion and viewpoint of your companions. Go and fight one of the two groups. Lead your companions towards the people against whom they will fight with greater enthusiasm and energy." In a way, both Adi and Khalid were both right. Adi proved the strength of his faith, showing that he was willing to fight against anyone who returned away from Al-Islam, even if that meant fighting against his closest relatives. But Khalid ibn al-Walid radiallahu anhu was right, for the people of Qais were not anywhere close to Adi's level of faith. And so it was wise not to put them in a situation wherein they would be tempted to side with their former allies, especially considering the fact that there was an alternative solution, sending them to fight against the people of Qais. Inshallah, we will stop here and pick it up in video number 25, the Prophet's legendary legacy, military that is. This is page number again 445 in the biography of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وتبارك اسم ربك ولا إله غيرك ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، سلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.